In the early 1980s, you got involved in publishing what became the Guide for Three Rivers, the Stanislaus Tuolumne American, which was published under FOR's aegis, but you did all the work on along with other people who helped. How did that idea even come about, and what was your involvement in it?
Well, it was because of my newly launched career as a writer and publisher. I had done my first book, which was on the topic of juggling, in 1977, and learned the specifics, the down and dirty logistics of publishing books, and wanted to take off and do another one because, and so in 1980, 2 years after the book on juggling, I signed up to do, or in fact proposed probably, to do a book which described the history of the South Fork of the American, the Tuolumne River, and of course the Stanislaus from Camp 9. Those are the three rivers that were getting all the new rafting traffic, and so I wanted to do a book on the history. I was concerned that that would be lost, and wanted to dig it up too. It wasn't going to be a turn left, turn right river guide. It was going to be cultural and geologic and natural history book of the three. Spent probably a year interviewing people, had a wonderful time doing that. Talked with people like Elsa Bailey, Bob Hackamack.
Bailey being the namesake of Bailey Falls and the first woman kayaker to go down the Stanislaus in the early 60s.
That's right. Elsa was one of the first ones. She, I think, and Bryce Whitmore and maybe Mr. Munger were amongst the very few to start paddling the Stan in the 60s. And I didn't interview Mr. Munger or Mr. Whitmore, but I did interview Elsa Bailey. And then I got a hold of people in Tuolumne County whose parents and grandparents had been involved in the early history of the Tuolumne when they were, when it was nothing but a way to get down to the gold fields. Very little use of the river.
So I recall in the mid-70s that Sarge Preston, a guide for ARDA, published a little booklet called An Interpretive Guide to the Stanislaus.
That's right.
Was that one of the sources that you were working with?
Bob Center and Sarge, and I'll remember those two, did mostly geology because Bob Center loved it and Sarge Preston loved it, and so they focused on the geology of it, and they and that was a natural history guide. A small thing. I still have a copy. Give me a week or two and I'll find it. And that came before the Guide to Three Rivers.
And then for Guide to Three Rivers, Carol Nelson put together, I think, a mile-by-mile description of all the pieces of the river and where they were. And again, kind of gave you a vocabulary of the locational sequence on the Stanislaus.
Right.
Not the other rivers so much.
Right.
But you did all this research into historical photographs and just incredible amounts of background trying to unearth the history of what went on in these rivers.
Yeah, loved it. The Stan and the Tuolumne, well, the American, all three have a tremendous amount well, they have a tremendous amount of history, and the post-contact history, of course, blew up during the gold rush era. All three of them were mined extensively. The American the most, and the Tuolumne second. So it was, you could find archival photographs of the they call it hydraulic mining, when they blast a hillside with what amounts to an enormous fire hose to bring slush and slurry down into the river. As I recall, I think the potentially very first environmental law ever passed was in the 1860s, because the miners, the sluice or the dredge miners, we call them dredge miners, were turning the rivers, the canyons, into mud slubs. And so the farmers downstream were really upset, and as a result they made, it's called dredge mining, or is that what it's called? When you just fire a hose.
Hydraulic mining.
Hydraulic mining, when you fire a hose at a hillside and it turns the river into a mud stream, not even close to water, which you can imagine would be problematic for the people downstream trying to irrigate with it. Anyway, so there's photographs of that, and I talked with the granddaughters and grandsons of guys that had worked on the mines and on places down the river. I talked with, what's his name? Harry Cobden. Harry Cobden and a guy named Melvin Belli were two rambunctious Tuolumne County natives that just after the war decided to go for a hee-haw down the Tuolumne River, which they did in, probably they were hanging onto logs. And they crashed and burned down the first 4 or 5 or 6 miles before they decided that probably wasn't the best idea, and they hiked out. I only mention that because Harry Cobden went on to run, he became a lawyer, a well-known lawyer, and went on to become the campaign head of, I believe it was Upton Sinclair's effort to run for the governorship of California in the late 30s. Wait a minute, is that right?
I think that's right, yeah.
Because he came, that must have been before the war. He did run Upton Sinclair's campaign. Anyway, and Melvin Belli became this enormous ambulance chasing tort kind of guy in San Francisco, very famous for suing the city and governments and so forth. Flamboyant guy.
The book was published as a very nice little paperback, color cover. How well did it sell?
We only printed 5,000 copies, and you'll do well to find one today. I have one, and I'm sure, given enough time, I'll find it. It's in the house. And others have it, but there's certainly, if you can find it, it's tough. It's a collector's item, but 5,000 copies were printed, and they were sold.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Well, it did have mile by mile, although not much in the way of a turn left, turn right, but there was some there, and maybe it was bought by some rafters trying to figure out which way to turn.